Hi, what I want to talk about now is how we handle contract modification and how it impacts the recognition of revenues under IFRS 15. What's the issue? Well, the issue with the challenge when we have a contract modification is, well, if it's done on a standalone basis, it's not really a problem. This is pretty straightforward. We simply treat the contract modification as a new or second contract, and we account for it in just the same manner as we accounted the first contract. That's not the issue. The issue arises where we have contract modifications which are impacted by prior contracts. In other words, they're not independent, and they should really be treated as a bundle. This is a lot more complex, and it's constrained in terms of what we do because we can't go back and rewrite history. So we have to have a prospective solution. The best way of thinking about how the standard addresses this is to think about a simple example, and I'm going to focus on the company here, Sydney Toyota, and they've entered into a contract to sell 120 white Toyota Corollas to Bayswater Rentals at $20,000 each. This is 10 cars per month for 12 months. That's our initial contract, or our first contract. Our contract modification occurs after 6 months, and after 6 months the contract is increased to 30 cars, in other words 150 cars in total. The price for the additional 30 cars is $20,750, which is the standalone price of the Toyota Corollas at the contract modification date. So what we have here is a modification for an extra 5 cars per month. The issue here is that it's a standalone contract, so therefore there's no need to think about what the relationship is between the new and the modified contract. We treat them separately. So we'd let the first contract stand and allow it to be accounted for the full 12 months of the contract, and we'd treat the contract modification as a new or second contract for the additional 30 cars, 5 cars per month, at $20,750. In terms of what the accounting would look like, what you can see here is that we'd recognise the first contract and would have 12 monthly entries under the first contract for 10 cars at $20,000, that's $200,000. So Sydney Toyota would recognise revenue of $200,000 per month and cash received of $200,000 per month. Under the modified or second contract, we'd recognise the variation of the contract, which is an additional 5 cars per month at $20,750. And so we'd have to recognise revenue on the sale of an extra 5 cars, $103,750, and the receipt of cash of $103,750. So if you look at this and just stand back, what you can see is that we're treating 2 contracts as separate contracts, and we're accounting for them as discrete contracts. That's pretty straightforward and not problematic in any way. In terms of thinking about how this becomes more problematic, let's start off with the same fact scenario, fact situation. We have 120 cars, $20,000 each, 10 cars per month over the course of a year. After 6 months, the contract is modified and is increased by 30 cars again to 150 cars, so an extra 5 cars per month. But the difference here is that the cars are being sold at $17,000 each, which is not the standalone price. Now, the issue here is that if we accounted for it in the same way that we did the previous example, we'd have one contract which was profitable and one contract which was probably unprofitable, and it's going to potentially distort what appears in the financial statements. So that's a constraint. So the first issue here is that we can't go back and rewrite history. Once we've recognised the revenue, we can't go back and adjust it. So what we do on the modification date is that for accounting purposes, we terminate the first contract and limit it to 60 cars at $20,000 each. And we create a new modified second contract, which encompasses the remainder of the first contract and the modification. So we create a second contract, and this is for 90 cars at $19,000. The $19,000 is the weighted average of the residual cars from the first contract, that's 60 cars at $20,000, and the 30 cars at $17,000 under the modification. So in terms of what the accounting looks like, what we'd have to recognise would be the initial recognition of revenue under the first contract, 10 cars at $20,000 per car for 6 months. So from January to June, we'd recognise revenues of $200,000 per month. And for the remainder of the year, we'd recognise the journal entries for the second/modified contract, which is for 15 cars, 10 under the initial contract and 5 under the modified contract. And that would be at $19,000 or $285,000. This will be recognised each month as revenue for the periods July to December. So what you can see here is that we're restarting the contract on the modified basis from the date of the contract modification. Thank you.